Part of our cultural phenomena is the amount of cruelty or hostility that is directed towards women from men. And I say part of it because there's also lots of cruelty directed from women towards men. There's also cruelty directed from women to women. But I want to look at a couple of the puzzle pieces that go into ensuring that these statistics will continue as long as we have a cult designed the way our culture is. So the first distinction is between the mental and the spontaneous. And what I would suggest is that as a culture, we are told the way that we should relate to other people. We are told as men the way that we should relate to women. And there is a gap between what I would call this mental learning and the spontaneous reflexive learning that is born out of witnessing behavior. So you have the schooling of the mind, which comes with its various shoulds. This should be this way, this should be that way. A good man is like this, a bad man is like this. So this is all mental learning. But then there is the spontaneous or unconscious learning, which is the reenactment of what we have witnessed. Another key distinction is between the self and the other. Now, this distinction comes into play with the phenomena of marriage, to become one. It's common to observe people cleaning up their house, for example, before having company, making sure that what the neighbors see is nicer than what we see, being polite to a stranger and rude to one's family, for example. This combination of creating a distinction between self and other, in which the more unfamiliar person, the stranger, those not involved are distinct, they're separate, with the mental learning of how people, separate people, are to be treated, creates this phenomena where the other is typically treated using the mental map. You go to a party, you're going to rely on the mental map. I should be arriving in these clothes. I should be saying this and saying that. I should be shaking hands like this and doing that. I should be having a drink like this and like that. There is a mental map. I'm coming to a job interview. Job interviews go like this. Therefore, I will go like this. And so when you're in the category of the other, the mental map is the primary map that governs behavior as a willed, conscious choice, which may also become a habit for the treatment of the other. The spontaneous and internalized map of past experience is how we treat ourselves. So we may say, be nice, say thank you, because that's a mental map. However, when we brush our own teeth and put a towel down, do we say thank you to ourselves? When we make a mistake, do we say, oh, that was nothing, don't worry about it, you'll do better next time? Or do we say, you piece of shit, what do you think you're doing? Everyone will find out, da 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 da. So the internalized map relates to the self. It is the spontaneous, internalized map of what we have witnessed in what was done to us and what was done around us. The mental or polite map is the cultural doctrine, at least the verbal form of that doctrine, of the way of treating another. This is how you dress in public. You can do whatever you want behind closed doors, that's understood, but this is how you dress in public. This is how you talk in public. You can talk however you want behind closed doors. This is how you do this in public. This is how you do this in public. So it is a cultural construct created for the other. The other, that which is the public mask, in relationship to the other, that which is the other public mask. Another important distinction is between the feminine and a female. Men have a mix of yin and yang, masculine and feminine energy in them, and have the capacity to assume a masculine or a feminine posture. The speaker, for example, is assuming a masculine posture. The listener is assuming a feminine posture. The giver, a masculine posture. The receiver, a feminine posture. The teacher, a masculine posture. The student, a feminine posture. Both men and women can assume masculine and feminine postures. Both men and women have a masculine side and a feminine side. There is a distinction between female and feminine, male and masculine, that is important to note. However, biologically, females are predisposed to be feminine. I mean, just the very nature of the body, the nature of the hormones, the nature of preference. For example, in Iceland, where there is an incredible effort to create gender neutrality, females generally prefer nursing over oil rig work. There's no force. There's no even financial incentive in a kind of culture that ensures survival, security, and well-being for all on basic physical needs. But the men sign up for the oil rigs and the women sign up for nursing. It's not pushed in that women are unequal. It's not said that. That's just what male and females choose when given the choice. Take females from 100 countries, 100 females, 100 men from 100 countries. You line up those two jobs. You get to be in an oil rig or you get to nurse. What do you want to do? More females choose nursing. More men choose oil rigs. Oil rigs are more dangerous. Nursing is safer. Oil rigs are more personal, more object-related. Nursing is more people, interpersonal related. That's one of the distinctions. So it's not to say there isn't the occasional woman that says, hey, let's go do oil rigging. And the occasional woman who doesn't have a body stronger than a male's body to do oil rigging and lift all the weights and get all greasy and all that. It's just not the predominant statistic. There's an influence where the hormones and female characteristics of a female body predispose a female to be more feminine than masculine, and vice versa. Now, the arousal template is the pattern of flow, meaning arousal or stimulation is the pattern of it's what brings in the most intense presence You could say, for example, if you took a 4K television. So you got a 4K television, you've got 4,000 data points. A 4K television. And a low arousal point on that TV might be that 5% of the lights on that screen were turned on. So it's mostly black, but there's 5% light coming out. And the total arousal would be the point where every one of those LED diodes, whatever, is illuminated, is running current. It's running at maximum capacity. Now, within the human body and within the human arousal system, there's moderate, low interest. I don't even notice that. To, that's caught my attention, but, I'm not going to act on it. It's caught my attention. That's really exciting. It's becoming the most important thing around. It's engaging all of my attention, all of my energy, all of my presence. We're reaching a point of high arousal. And of course, the sexuality that is the most satisfying is the sexuality that occurs at a point when both people are in a terrain of high arousal. Now, arousal can come from pain and pleasure, or both. It can come from the full range of emotions. It can come from a full range of fantasy and thought. But it is correlated with being 100% present. And the mental map of relating to the other is inadequate, does not correlate with full arousal, because it is a path of mental shoulds and shouldn'ts and boundaries. Don't do this, don't do that, do this. And you see this interesting gap between the two maps in this phenomena which I experience as a man. In the women who have a low arousal threshold around me, meaning I do not arouse them, beyond, 10, 20, 30, 40%, whatever it is. The women who have a low arousal threshold around me maintain the proprietary mental map of the other, of the polite, of the culture. The women who have a high arousal around me go into the spontaneous or self map. And one of the things that's common in a traumatic or an abusive culture is that the spontaneous or self map is one of negation, one of violation, one of abuse. And so one of the symptoms of being transferred from the other map into the self map, the way we treat ourselves by the internalized pattern of the culture around us, is saying things like, you can do whatever you want to my body, hurt me, use me, take me. Because you can treat me as badly as I treat myself, because that's the cue, that's the language for crossing over the cultural divide of the mental map of etiquette into the internalized pattern of full-on interaction as demonstrated by the parents and by those who were in high arousal emotional states. meaning the spontaneous or self map is formed by how people treat themselves and each other in peak emotional states without self-discipline and control. Because that's the deep template. The discipline and the control is to override and interfere in the spontaneous template in order to be civilized. I feel ravenously hungry, I want to eat something, but I'm in a tea party. Let me make some witty repartee. Let me get the right fork. Let me say after you. Let me do all of these things that are delaying tactics, that increase the gap between impulse and response. And we call this cultured. A monkey wants to sleep, it puts its head on a branch and sleeps. Not a big gap between impulse and response. A monkey wants to have sex, someone's nearby, have at it. There's not a big gap between impulse and response. It's incredibly efficient. It's incredibly nutritious. There's a direct, an intelligent, and an efficient path between need and meeting the need. The more sophisticated the human culture, the more circuitous and abstract this path becomes. So you enter a sophisticated human culture and suddenly you have to be a certain age to have sex. A monkey doesn't. At whatever age a monkey wants to have sex is the age at which a monkey has sex. And a monkey has sex with whatever age wants to or is available to have sex with them. That's efficiency. That's direct. There's no guile, no manipulation, no shoulds and shouldn'ts. You have stimulus and you have response. With human beings, it's a whole host of different laws. When I was 26 years old, forming my first serious relationship with a 58-year-old woman, I learned that I should, according to everyone around me, be having sex with someone my own age. That even though it was relatively normal for 58-year-old men to date 26-year-old girls, and this was perfectly understandable, it was not so understandable for a 26-year-old boy to date a 58-year-old woman. So different laws apply for men than for women. Not so with monkeys. So we're dealing with the domain of the cult. One's not just supposed to say, wow, I would love to have sex with you. I feel a high arousal pattern just looking at you, and I have this imagination. How about it? No. One is supposed to do the exact opposite. You're interested in someone, play it cool, i.e., pretend that you are not interested. And on it goes. And one could say, after fashion, that you can tell how sophisticated, quote unquote, a culture is by how arduous, how tiresome, how long, how complicated the path is made to get from stimulus to response. I want to drink something, here. I want to drink something, so I will arrange a tea party 2 weeks from now, and so will be invited. And we won't just walk in our pajamas. No. That would be too intelligent. No. We're going to have a maid prepare this and do this and this and this. And of course, in some ways you see the rise and falls of quote, sophisticated culture. Most people would say the Victorian age in England, the pinnacle of, how to spend as much time as possible, not on the object at hand. How to prepare for the job, and then prepare for the interview for the job, and then prepare how to plan this and this and this, and then learn this, and then all of this stuff, what? For the same basic needs: eating, sleeping, fucking. Is it that much else? Eating, sleeping, fucking? And you can say that a monkey does this more reliably, more nourishingly, more dependably than many human beings who don't have a safe place to sleep in many locations. Even our deer in our local city have more legal options for sleep than many of our homeless, because we're a sophisticated culture, and we could never allow homes to be built that were just 100 square feet, nice sleeping areas for people, because that would be too unsophisticated. They have to be at least 1,200 square feet. They must have at least 2 bathrooms. They must have this. They must have X outlets per room, and they must be of this voltage, and they must be tested with this UL wire and multiple permits, etc., because we're sophisticated. We don't just put our head on a branch and rest without a mortgage. No, we're sophisticated. And so there's this tension between the arousal template that brings about the greatest presence sensorily, mentally, emotionally, so that you're fully engaged in the movie and the drama. And there's this cultural template that says this is the way to treat a lady. This is the way to not treat a lady. You don't treat a lady like that. You don't treat a man like that. This isn't this. And so you have this dance. And of course, there's only so far into, quote, obscurity and sophistication. There's only so long and circuitous one can make the map between stimulus and response before you burn up all of the energy getting there. And when you finally arrive at the right moment to have sex, you're bored, tired, and lost, as opposed to in a place of full arousal. And so we kind of go back and forth, and things like Tinder emerge to kind of try and find some neutral ground, and then we partition. We partition the wife, the woman of character, a lady, from a slut, someone that you might have a shorter path with. So sophistication or culture being how long can you make the path between stimulus and response? I have an impulse, let's do it. I have an impulse, so let's not do it. And then let's create 1,000 different little rituals and paths and stuff between not doing it and doing it. And if the relationship survives through all 1,000 of the little checks and dotted T's, etc., then if we still have energy, we'll do it. So what's going on in the abuse of women, psychologically, physically, sexually, from men? And why does it increase to some extent with marriage, and particularly the psychological abuse? Well, if you look at how men are treated in their feminine side, and understand that every woman has a masculine and feminine side, the feminine side in the American male is, first of all, shamed. Every male, by the time they're 10 or so, understands that to be considered valuable and potentially high status, they have got to exert certain alpha criteria that are masculine. And that these are the defining These are the defining traits of rank. They're not one of multiple options of rank, meaning a sensitive, artistic, feminine male does not have a position of rank. They may have a position of tolerance, they may have a position of respect, but it is understood that it is not high ranking in the culture. Which means that every boy, every man, has experienced the devaluing of their own feminine side since birth. They've watched it be ignored 90% of the time, patronized 80-90% of the time, minimized, undeveloped, ignored, shamed, bullied, attacked, humiliated, treated as garbage. The feminine side in the man is treated like shit. Feelings, and tears in particular, are something to be turned away from, something to be hidden, because they are a form of weakness, because they are feminine. And this protocol of shame, abuse, ignoring, silence, lack of development. I mean, when is the last time a high school spent a single hour in a single year to teach emotional literacy? What are the feelings called? What produces each feeling? What shifts one feeling to another? Is that too much to learn? What they're called? What induces them? And what shifts one feeling to another? How do you turn anger into love? Or love into anger? Or anger into fear? Or fear into anger? Or fear and anger into shame? Or guilt into joy? Or joy into guilt? How do these transformations occur with the same energy present? A single hour of a single year for the driving force of humanity is too much to prepare an individual for life? This is a joke, and it is an act of profound cruelty to deny our men and our women emotional literacy. Well, what do we do with boys when they start jockeying up and connecting with other men? Well, we are very quick to tease them as being gay and to shame them until they show appropriate levels of cruelty and disinterest. We reduce the feminine in men to an animal state, capable of grunting, of moving away, of, I don't know, that's it, let's not talk about that. What are you talking about? Let's avoid all kindness and affection at every level. Let's avoid everything meaningful. Let's let you know as a young man that if you are caught in your feminine side, it is social suicide. And then let's elevate the sadists, the masochists. Let's elevate the men who torment the feminine in women. Let's have the big alpha walk in from the gym and say, "What's up, son? Can't take a little bit of heat?" Meaning I'm only 40% stronger than you. You actually have intelligence to understand that I could bash you over the head if I want to bully you like I've been bullying these other people. You're scared of me? In other words, let's shame you for having feelings. Or directed at a girl, a young woman. You have a feeling. How dumb. I'm a guy. I'm more important because I'm exhibiting the masculine trait. Now, this choreographed training goes in 10,000 times. This forms the spontaneous template. This is how a man is taught to treat his own feminine self. Something to be ashamed of, to hide, to humiliate, to keep secret, to lie about, to cover over, to devalue and treat like shit. Okay? Now we've formed the spontaneous template, and of course the boy grows up watching the male-female dynamic at home. Now sometimes the mother plays the masculine role and humiliates the need of the man. It's the same message. Your feminine side is shit. Sometimes the mother adds to the wound in the teenage boy, saying, I hope you don't grow up to be your father. He's so useless. He's scared. He won't get us enough money. He just doesn't show initiative. He's too kind, too feminine. Be a real man. Bully other people. Get what you want and give that to your mother. So you have the sustained abuse of many masculine mothers, but it's the exact same message. Your feminine side is inadequate. Your masculine side is important, and it goes to the daughters, of course, as well. You want to make me proud? Do better than the boys at masculine things. Do math better than the boys. That's great. Do masculine things better than men, and you'll be ranked highly as a girl, as a woman. So in this dance, and of course you go to work, your boss says, how you doing, kiddo? And you say, well, I'm scared, I'm nervous. I'm wondering if people are going to humiliate me at my desk the way they did at school. This is a new environment. I've never really had a breathing space in my entire life to talk about feelings. And I'm kind of hoping that somewhere, since I'm spending most of my life 10, 12 hours a day commuting and driving to and from this office, I'm hoping that I'm actually going to be able to be an emotional human being with dignity in this office. But it doesn't seem likely in a culture as sociopathic as ours, so I'm nervous. Okay, so you've got honesty, you've got transparency, you've got vulnerability, and you've got an openness about feelings. So how many people know the cult well enough to know that whether a man or a woman expressed the truth of their feminine side in even the most basic, how long did that take? 2 minutes? 120 seconds? Now, how many think that the manager, that the employer, that the recruiter is going to elevate the male or the female for being feminine, for expressing the feminine side? Well, the whole system is rigged. The chauvinism begins by defining value based on productivity of things. And what an honest boss is going to think, because it's accurate, is there's a good chance that if this employee focuses on their feminine side, that they'll be a healthier human being, but that less will be produced by including the feminine as well as the masculine. That if we could find someone who would just say, I'm sure it's going to be great, boss, because that took 2 seconds or 3 seconds rather than 120 seconds, and because that was a lie rather than the truth, that someone who's willing to lie to save time and suppress the feminine is likely going to be more sociopathic, who is likely going to follow orders more, who is likely to push beyond their own body, the feminine. When your body says, this is terribly painful, I need a break, and you say, plow on, kiddo. We're just getting started. Get to work. Well, the person who disciplines themselves into that the most gets promoted. by pushing through the cues in their body saying a little bit of balance might be nice here. Maybe we could have a chant. Maybe we could have a dance. Maybe we could actually enjoy our job. Enjoyment. A feminine phenomena in men and women to pause and to enjoy life. To smell the roses. Now, we pay lip service to it. Don't forget to smell the roses, we say, as we rush off to our 12-hour days in which we're not going to smell a single flower, in which we're going to be thinking ahead 60 miles an hour, like, oh, I have to do this, and then I have to do this, and this. Let's pretend, let's pay a little lip service to the feminine, and then do the exact opposite. Now, how much torture, how much cruelty, how much pain has the average man absorbed in their feminine side by the time they have their first sexual experience? 10,000, 20,000, 1,000,000 moments of shame and humiliation for their feminine side. And, of course, assuming it's not a rape, when they meet the female, the other, it's the mysterious other. So what do I say? Of course, they act their friend. They don't go from their gut. What should I say? What should I not say? It's a whole cultural, thing. So you're all, and then she's, of course, doing that, following the cultural map. You work towards closeness, and at some point, if there is flow and if there is chemistry, there will be a divide of masculine and feminine energy in the couplehood. Because if there's no listener and two speakers, there's no chemistry. If there's two givers and no receiver, there's no chemistry, there's no flow. If there's two teachers and no student, there's no flow. If there's two listeners and no speaker, there's no flow. For that chemistry, tension, and polarity to be there, you are going to have to divide into a masculine and feminine role. And the most dominant masculine, the person who's most comfortable occupying the masculine role, biologically predisposed to be a male, and the most predominantly predisposed to be feminine, biologically predisposed to be a female. When that starts taking shape, and as intimacy develops, the man discovers an interesting thing. She's not an other. His feminine side and her feminine side are the same way. Meaning his feminine side listens when his masculine side bosses her around. Or his feminine side kicks up a fuss about it or whatever. And his feminine side receives when his masculine side gives it. And she receives when he gives it to her. But there's an interesting thing that's occurring in this dynamic called a double standard. He doesn't pause to listen to his own feelings. He doesn't think his own feelings are worth listening to. He doesn't know how to talk to his own feelings because he has been trained in sustained abuse towards his own feminine. And once he realizes that they are the same after a certain amount of time, as the woman goes from being a mystery or a pedestal object into just another human being who's more feminine than he is, the obvious question comes up: why, if you're being the feminine, why am I treating my own feminine like shit, and I'm treating your feminine in this arduously constructed cultural matrix? Is your feminine side really that different? Doesn't your feminine side listen, receive, learn just like mine? So why is it that my feminine side is a piece of shit and your feminine side is to be treated like this and that and the other? Particularly in most of the frameworks still present culturally, particularly if you're a woman who's also expecting me to bring home most of the income, or all of the income. Because for all the women that choose nursing and all the men that choose oil rigs, the oil rig pays more money because of its danger factor. The construction worker pays more money. And again, the risk factor, etc. Women do not seek out physical brawn risk as a gender statistic. Even when given the choice, even, trying to reculture. You can take a bunch of feminists. Sit them down, you got 2 jobs. Oil rig, make more money. Nursing, make less money. Nursing inside, talking to other feminists. You can talk to them. You can bitch around how terrible men are. You can meet up in coffee breaks. Oil rigs out in the wind. You can't talk about what rotten people men. You're too tired at the end of the day. The feminists pick the nursing. So they make less money. And whether they like it or not, they may even punish men who have more money, having picked the lower paying job, than punish men for making more money, as somehow robbing them of their rights. They could be out in an oil rig tomorrow, if they would develop their body to be strong enough to carry the pipes. I don't want to have to develop that. I don't want to have to go to a gym to push weights so that I can go do a harder job with more risk that some guy can do. Why do that? Well, this adds to the concern here. Okay, so my feminine gets treated like shit. Your feminine should be treated greatly. Now, when I'm coming at this through my mind, I don't feel terribly aroused. I feel bottled up with the shoulds and shouldn'ts of the culture. Should I be giving flowers? What should I do for an anniversary? This is all cultural stuff. It's not, I'm in the place for a nice fuck. Are you ready? No, this is culturally, it's like, okay, I'm in the place for this. So what do I have to do this, or this? Well, that mental shoulding is not arousing because it doesn't engage presence. Presence is the spontaneous emotional template that externalizes the inner dance of male and female, feminine and masculine inside. When the inner dance of feminine and masculine energy that's actually programmed inside is externalized, you have peak arousal and you have peak flow. So for the man that's treating his inner feminine like shit, not listening to her feelings, pushing over her feelings, telling her what to do and blah, 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 and who has learned that that's what's happening in the cult around him, doing that with a sexual partner, ignoring her feelings, pushing through boundaries, some sense of roughness, crudeness, etc., will be highly arousing to the male. Now, for all of the masculine women who treat their own femininity like shit, it will also be highly arousing. Because, if you look at, for example, the amount of rape fantasy in women being taken, being violated, it's externalizing the internal spontaneous template that they've gleaned within the culture of how the masculine treats the feminine when the control is off. Now, the arousal comes from turning the taps on, turning the power on full blast. The arousal comes from maximizing flow. When you open the dam and are producing the most electricity that the generators can possibly produce by releasing control is the point of peak arousal and thus peak sexual flow and thus peak sexual pleasure and satisfaction, because sexual pleasure is about the intensity of the chemistry and flow. It is not inherently linked to the courtesy of that flow. So here we have the typical split. I will marry the lady who will be the mother of my children, who will follow the shoulds and should nots and da-da-da-da-da. And I will be the polite gentleman to said lady. Hello, madam. May I take your coat? Please sit down before me, even though I'm tired. I would not dream of eating a bit of food before you arrived at the table, even though I'm hungry. I will observe the 10,000 rules of niceties and this and that, and of course I would never eat the food with that fork, which is 20% different from this fork. Who would ever think of such a thing? No. It's outrageous. Elbows on the table, eating with fingers. Ghastly. Of course. This is a relationship of political and social dogma and etiquette drummed in to the brain and dry of feeling. So I will have that with this woman, and it will feel as empty and as meaningless and as shitty and boring as every cult dogma feels. But my mind will tell me, what a great lady. According to my cultural doctrine, this is a find. My goodness, did you see the way that she swished her elbow? And the way that she walks with such curated effort in those horribly uncomfortable shoes? My goodness! A lady that has the stamina and discipline to be a lady in this fucked up scripted dogma, indeed. I mean, okay, a real find according to all the checklists. I have no interest. It's exhausting. It's boring. It's miserable. I know. I'll go fuck someone down the street for $200 who doesn't make me go through the bullshit and who will agree to be treated as trashily and perfunctorily as my own feminine side has been treated since birth, which will feel familiar and unscripted and deeply satisfying, only to find that I have committed a terrible crime, being myself, externalizing what is, what was given to me, telling the truth about the shitty ways that my feminine has been treated. And now to be branded a liar, a traitor, a cheat, for having the unruly, the rude, that most horrific of ideas of authentically externalizing that which was within, of being honest about what I actually want. Men do have feelings. They're just not necessarily the feelings that they are going to be rewarded for speaking. So they have the good sense not to tell anyone, but then get shamed and blamed for that as well by the females who have got to, at some level, know what's going on and feel just as frustrated with the whole dynamic, which builds up resentment and rage. Why do I have to feel like a shit to be authentic? Why does your feminine have to be treated 10 times better than mine? Plus, I still have to pay the bills because you choose the nursing job and I choose the oil rig. I choose the discipline. I mean, it takes a heck of a lot of discipline to deal with all this stuff, and so I choose that. You know, I've learned to treat my body like shit and da-da-da-da-da. And on top of all that, then you want me to court you and be romantic, and it's like, my goodness, when has my feminine ever learned to be courted and feel romantic? When has a woman loved and adored my feelings, helped them come out of their numb and comatose state, frozen at 2 years old, feeling helpless and being cared for? When has a mother nursed that feminine side as preciously as the masculine and honored the feelings and adjusted around them and showed that they mattered? When has the needy man been afforded more sex, more comfort, more nourishment than the sociopathic man, who is witty and sarcastic, dominant, assertive, and lies, and is granted all of the pussy he demands and takes from that position? When has the needy man coming from the feminine side and saying, please, I'm aching for validation. My feminine side has been treated like garbage from the day I was born by my mother and my father. How about some kindness to this, so that I could learn to love your feminine side authentically, the way you love mine? These men are hated by the feminists. They are hated by a majority of women who despise their own feminine side as much as they despise the feminine side as weak, blaming the victim for the abuse of dominance and chauvinism, from the overwhelming power of the culture, blaming the victim, hating the child for not being able to stand up to the abuse of an adult, as opposed to championing that child and growing with it. The amount of hatred I've met from women towards my feminine side is immense. So how to keep the kindness alive in that cruelty and in that pain? To be aware that the more need that I have, the more I will be hated by women. The more my feminine side will be hated by women. But then, of course, the feminine, by its very nature, has need. Need for protection, need for the masculine. They work as a couple, a polarity within and without. The more vulnerable and emotional one is, the more protection, the more respect must be given to honor those feelings. Well, how do you externalize that pattern when the internalized pattern is one of abuse? This is the crisis of our culture. And the shame and the indignity is that we've gone from blaming women, of course, for being the faults and the root of all evil and da-da-da. I mean, we've been doing that for thousands of years. It's a cruel and barbaric act. Well, now let's blame the men as being the root of all evil, so that the men that we shame, humiliate, and do not emotionally educate, the men that we systematically train to rape and violate their own feminine, creating a spontaneous sexual template that ensures that to meet peak arousal, they have to externalize that code, or they do not feel fully satisfied. The men that we systematically program in the deeper spontaneous self-program, we then unleash on girls and women who we then say, be a gentleman and do not reach sexual peak arousal. Be a gentleman and do not find sexual satisfaction. The most important woman in your life should be the acculturated mental woman who you have the least in common with and the biggest facade. And the people that you can connect with who allow you, as I say, that the women who reach peak arousal switch from this polite mode to use me, want me, fuck me the way ever you... They've internalized the same wound. And so they're finding peak arousal because they treat their own feminine side like shit. They're trying to be masculine to be valued in the culture. And although the feminine energy in them of allowing and surrendering and opening creates the doorway for sexual energy to flow between the masculine and feminine, it is a doorway of abuse. Rape me, fuck me, use me. It's the only way I have my orgasm, because that's what I've learned inside. So you have male and female systematically shamed, traumatized, and bullied into abusing the internal feminine, creating a dry and sexless cultural marriage that denies the inner template, that perpetuates the abuse cycle through the generations, and that creates infidelity in a search for fulfillment, is both person. The woman who will never allow her husband to rape her will experience a real man by the stranger that grabs her at a club when she's half drunk, takes her into the bathroom and fucks her. And some part of her longs to be able to share that with her husband. But it's too big of a gap between the mental program of the appropriate wife and woman and the way one is culturally shown to treat another. It's too insane. It's too crazy. It's too scary. And so we unleash this insanity and the loneliness of this gap on our entire population with equal cruelty and equal impact on both genders. Unfulfilled women, unfulfilled men, lies, loneliness, shame, and guilt produced by an insanity, by an ignorance that is too small, to understand the gap between the mental culturated self and the spontaneous self, or the dis-ease and unhealthy aspect of forcing that gap to perpetuate. There is no healing of the psyche until the gap between the spontaneous self, the feminine self, and the masculine self, the acculturated self, is integrated. By treating men's feminine side with honor, respect, and dignity, by treating women's feminine side with honor, respect, and dignity, by having a God-goddess pairing at the top of the cultural hierarchy, of the cultural mythology. If you are living in a paradigm where the peak deity is masculine, you are living in a chauvinistic paradigm. Once you set the tape measure up in that way, the inevitable striving for goodness and excellence will bend every individual into a skewed and distorted shape that will lead to unnecessary suffering, that will perpetuate cruelty. And it takes both genders to participate, to create and to allow that dynamic.